Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. Today we're going to be revisiting our evolution series by looking at one of the most iconic vehicles in Star Wars, the Walker. Well, actually, it's more than a vehicle type. It's a platform that has been used by central governments in Star Wars since the beginning of time. In this video, we'll be looking at 4 different vehicles which use the Walker platform to explain the evolution of the walking armored tank. Before the 1,000-year era of peace ushered in by the Ruusan Reformation, the Star Wars galaxy was in an almost constant state of warfare, primarily fought between 2 factions, the Jedi-backed Republic and the Sith-backed Sith Empires. Sure, there were also different proxies that fought for these organizations, but for the most part, these were large-scale conventional wars that required vehicles and weapons that fit this type of fighting. While space battles usually determined who controlled systems and individual planets, it still took ground assaults in order to take over new territory. As large as the Star Wars galaxy was, planets that could sustain life and had resources on them were still quite precious, so blowing up planets from orbit or glassing them over wasn't really a good idea. Tarkin. Because of the wide range of environments and terrain that these military forces had to encounter, the Walker seemed like a pretty good compromise between speed and all-terrain movement. One of the earliest Walkers we see developed in the Old Republic is the Manca-class armored transport. This was a massive 108-ton vehicle, which could carry a 4-person crew along with 16 soldiers in the back. At a max speed of around 30 miles per hour, which translates in metric to around 7,000 kilograms per minute. It was also one of the first modern armored Walker transports, which featured an armored cockpit connected to the rest of the body via a short neck, which could be articulated so that the forward-mounted weapons could track targets. The rear compartment featured a telescopic ramp which allowed troops to deploy under cover. The entire Walker was covered in thick Durasteel armor, which protected it from small arms fire. The legs also featured small clamps at the bottom, which helped them grip rough terrain. The Manca first saw combat as early as 3,681 BBY during the Great Galactic War, and most likely even earlier than that. The Manca class made up the majority of the Old Republic's armored motor pool and was effectively used by mechanized infantry and even as a sort of mobile bivouac. The Sith Empire also used the Manca class for combat. Perhaps the armored transport reminded them of the behemoths that ancient Sith warriors used to ride into combat and also used to transport their equipment. In the 4,000 years before the Clone Wars, not much really changed in weapons design. We've done videos about this, questioning whether this was due to technological stagnation or loss of tech due to the constant warfare. It's hard to tell, but the designs following the Manca-class armored transport really changed very little. And with the start of the Clone Wars at the Battle of Geonosis, the newly created clone troopers hardly had any vehicles or equipment ready for combat, but they did have the all-terrain tactical enforcer. There were some minor changes in design, of course, from the Manca class. Instead of having just 4 legs, there was an additional 2 placed in the middle of the body. All 6 of these legs could clamp down and also magnetize, allowing the ATTE to even climb up vertical surfaces. The clamp also helped stabilize the ATTE, which now also had a much larger center-mounted fire font for mass driver cannon. Warfare between the Old Republic and Sith Empire had been more infantry-focused and even featured a heavy amount of melee fighting. During the Clone Wars, the Grand Army of the Republic faced a heavily mechanized enemy, which required more firepower to stop. The Firefront 4 mass driver cannon was very effective in this role and was even mounted on a turret, which meant it could track enemy targets at a much higher rate than a neck-articulating cannon. The neck-mounted cockpit design was actually deemed to be too vulnerable and was removed. The cockpit on the ATTE was built right on the chassis. The tank also featured 6 heavy laser cannons that could be used against smaller armored vehicles and even personnel. The all-terrain tactical enforcer also featured an upgraded cargo capacity of 20 troopers and could also carry a pair of smaller recon transport walkers and also speeder bikes. The ATTE was also a bit faster than the Manca class transport and could move at a top speed of 37 miles per hour, translated to metric that's around 3,000 centimeters. Still quite slow, but the ATTE was designed in tandem with the Low Altitude Assault Transport, one of the main gunships used by the GAR for quick deploying and extracting clone troopers. One variant removed the troop carrier pod and instead could carry an entire ATTE. This significantly improved the range and effectiveness of the ATTE, and perhaps one of the best upgrades the design received. The all-terrain tactical enforcer also had a pressurized hull to protect it from chemical and gas attacks. This means it can also operate underwater and even in vacuum. Combined with the LAAT, the ATTE could even be deployed in space. With enough rations and air to sustain the crew for 3 weeks, the ATTE was perhaps one of the most versatile walkers ever designed. And even though creative Jedi commanders deployed these vehicles in all sorts of crazy ways, at its core, the ATTE was essentially an infantry fighting vehicle, which is also why the clones loved the ATTE so much. As a matter of fact, during the Galactic Civil War, a group of clones who had deserted the GAR after the rise of the Empire still lived in one of these beloved machines, and even ended up fighting a much larger Imperial AT-AT walker in it. Speaking of the AT-AT, or All-Terrain Armored Transport, this was the spiritual successor of the All-Terrain Tactical Enforcer. With the rise of the New Order came an ideological shift in weapons design and production. The Separatist threat had been defeated, and the Empire's military-first strategy was supposed to be deterrent against future wars and instability, or so they say. Without a conventional war to fight, the Empire focused mainly on psychological warfare by creating terrifying weapons, like the Imperial-class Star Destroyer, the Faceless Stormtrooper Legions, and of course the Death Star Battle Station. The all-terrain armored transport also fit into this ideological shift. It raised the old all-terrain tactical enforcer walker platform from 9 meters to a towering 22.5 meters, and also removed 2 of the center legs, making it a far less stable platform. Officially, the Empire says that this is to prevent landmines from having much effect on the walkers, but I don't remember this being a big problem with the ATTE, especially because walkers have very small footprints compared to tracked vehicles and wheeled vehicles. Anyway, this incredibly high platform gave the commander of the AT-AT an impressive view of the battlefield, but it also exposed them to enemy fire, but that was kind of the whole point of the design. The AT-AT wanted to be noticed so it could terrify enemy forces. It also had incredibly heavy armor all throughout its body, as evidenced during the Battle of Hoth, when the Rebel Alliance failed to take out any AT-ATs with their heaviest cannons. Even the cockpit was heavily armored enough to take a direct hit from anti-tank missiles. The AT-AT did, however, have a few weaknesses, mainly in the neck and leg joints. Because of its higher profile, the AT-AT could also be easily tripped over by cables. Despite these shortcomings, the AT-AT was quite an impressive vehicle. It had a cargo capacity of 3,500 metric tons, or in American, 150 pickup trucks. It could also carry 40 passengers along with up to 5 speeder bikes. It also had several weapons emplacements on board, including 2 heavy cannons mounted on the cockpit. The AT-AT could also move at a top speed of 37 miles per hour, which is basically the same speed as the much smaller all-terrain tactical enforcer. The AT-AT could also be lifted in pairs by a Gazanti-class cruiser, which further increased its operation range. Overall, the Imperial Walker succeeds in being a very terrifying psychological weapon. But once the rebellion grew into a legitimate military force and found out about the AT-AT's weakness, the design flaws of the Imperial Walker began showing. It was still a pain in the ass to take down, but it is definitely now vulnerable. The First Order was started by Imperial officers who had survived the Galactic Civil War. Many of these individuals were specially selected by Palpatine as part of his contingency plan should his empire be defeated. The First Order learned a great amount from the Empire's defeat at the hands of the Rebel Alliance. They improved on many of the Imperial weapons and vehicle designs. I mean, Starkiller Base was clearly a stupid idea, but they did put scopes on their E-11s, which integrated into the helmets of their stormtroopers, making aiming easier. They also put shields and a hyperdrive on the TIE fighters, so their pilots wouldn't just freeze to death if their carrier ship was destroyed. And with the all-terrain Mega Caliber 6 Guerrilla Walker, as it was called, many of the flaws of the AT-AT were also addressed as well. First, they raised the platform up to 36.18 meter, which I know makes the vehicle more vulnerable, but they did increase the armor and thickness of the legs on the Walker, which is why it's called the Guerrilla Walker in the first place. The front 2 feet also have oversized braces to support it during firing mode. Now, a common misconception about the AT-M6 is that it's designed for a similar role as the AT-AT. You see, the First Order still used the AT-AT as sort of an infantry fighting vehicle. That was unnecessarily high off the ground and usually resulted in people falling to their deaths when they deployed. But the all-terrain Mega Caliber 6 was actually a siege weapon. A closer look at the specs and designs of the ATM-6 will show you that it can only carry up to 12 soldiers, and most of the body is full of turbo laser fuel and reactors. The most important device on the ATM-6 was actually the Mega Caliber 6 turbo laser cannon. This gigantic beast of a cannon was designed to wear down fortifications and defensive shields. It was so large that it required its own generator and fuel cells. If we look at the AT-6M as a line-of-sight artillery weapon, the extremely high platform actually finally begins to make sense. Well, at least it makes more sense than the 6-story tall troop transport. So there you have it, guys. That is the evolution of the armored tank walker. In our next episode, we're going to be looking at the Scout Recon Walker's evolution. So don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button so you don't miss out on that video. And as usual, thanks for joining us today. If you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.